Welcome, everyone, to another edition of 55 and 5. It's Ian Riccaboni, Cary Silkin, Cary. We have a breaking Hans Schmidt update.
Remember when I told you when Uncle Gunny and my dad and Uncle Nat and Frankie would play cards?
Yeah.
And they all had a bad hand in Jim Rummy.
Yeah.
They were allowed to call a frisher.
A frisher.
Which means you turn in. Everyone just agrees that they'll turn in the cards and re-up.
Okay.
Well, I'm calling a frisher on Hans Schmidt.
I got to work on my Yiddish. Hans Schmidt. Yeah, why? And tell the folks at home why we're calling a frisher.
A frisher.
Frisher. Okay. Okay.
Well, in going over these beautiful Parkhurst cards, and when we got to Hans Schmidt, and I dispensed the little I could about what I knew about him, Ian's notes said that he wrestled into the 70s. And all I had to base it off is what I knew from the wrestling magazines. I never saw him on TV, and I would read all the results in the magazines. So it just didn't sound right. Well, we double-checked with our good friend and a true, not only a historian, a living legend, Kevin Sullivan.
What a treat that is to just call him up.
Right.
Yeah.
And Kevin sort of agreed with me.
Yeah, and we did some more research. We found out that he continued to wrestle in Montreal, but not as regularly, not as notably. So that's where Hans Schmidt went toward the end of his career, continued to wrestle in Montreal, because Kevin agreed. I mean, he pointed out he was a big star in Boston. He pointed out he was a big star kind of in the New York area and the capital territory.
Right, when Kevin was growing up, he would see him at Boston Garden.
And we found out that less notable as time went on, gradually went into the wind. And breaking Tex McKenzie update. So if you go back, we've done 3. We're on card number 4 of 121. We talked about Tex McKenzie. Kevin gave us some great insight about a time in WCW in Australia. So we're talking the 60s.
This is Jim Barnett's
WCW, where there was a Gary Hart in a cage match.
Yeah. Kevin also confirmed, I don't like to speak ill about people, but that Tex was, to quote Kevin, he wasn't bad, he was horrible. You could continue with the
sure. So he was wrestling Bulldog Bob Brower, if I'm not mistaken.
Dick the Bulldog Brower.
Oh, Dick the Bulldog Brower, excuse me. And Gary Hart was a manager, and he was in a rat cage, as Kevin described it. And the finish to the match was the cage swung and hit Tex McKenzie in the head because he was so tall. Knocked him out, and Bulldog Brower pinned Tex McKenzie, much to the chagrin of the fans who did not like what they caused a riot. Who would have thought Tex McKenzie, so popular that him losing causes a riot?
But apparently he was a very smart businessman.
Yeah.
And when he got out of wrestling, somehow he morphed into the world of National Geographic.
Who knew? This is the 55 and 5 is the only place you're going to find this kind of information on Tex McKenzie, on Bulldog Brower, on Gary Hart, and WCW, the original WCW.
Oh, I'm scared about this week.
Yes. So we've had
nervous.
We've had some folks, and to review the concept here. 55 and 5 presented by Bisson Creative, BissonCreative.com, by Captain Lou, by Uncle Gunny, who you can hear about on Last Stop Penn Station. That's available on iTunes and all podcast platforms. We've had 3 wrestlers that had a bit of a national name so far. And one of the joys of this set is that there are Hall of Famers. There are notable wrestlers for their time, which you're very good at. Wrestlers that might have been very notable at the time that history has kind of passed by. And we're trying to bring those names back to life. But then there's some names that I've never heard of, and maybe you haven't either. And Cary and I can be rather verbose, so we set the history lesson timer at 5 minutes. Now, Cary, this is the trickiest one so far. So if you go back, you can watch Vern Gagne, Tex McKenzie. You can watch Hans Schmidt. 3 names that have main evented, that have been on the marquees of posters and things like that. This next one, though, not so notable. Cary, you may know him, you may not. This is not indicative of Cary's knowledge, and we do have a safety net. I have a little bit of information on this individual. So, Cary, I present to you a man who is wearing a championship belt with the Bahamian flag on it, on the side. The blue and yellow Bahamian flag.
A beautiful card.
It is. This is one of the more visually stunning cards of the set. And he is in yellow trunks, adorned with yellow trunks there. And do you have any idea who this man is?
Well, I was hoping it was Dory Dixon.
Okay.
Who had the same type body and look.
Right.
But Jack Claybourne.
Jack Claybourne.
Ian, I'm sorry.
This is why I like this set, because you have Vern Gagne. You have some of the bigger names that we'll get to. Buddy Rogers, spoiler. Buddy Rogers, one of his earliest cards, is in the set. Lou Thez, and again, another spoiler. So I'm going to set the clock for 5 minutes. Cary, you said you're sorry. Anything on Jack Claybourne other than he's got a championship from what appears to be the Bahamas?
I've never heard of him. I can't even say that I recognize his name, because don't forget, I have magazines and posters that go back to the 50s. So there's names that I know just from coming across them. But Jack, nope.
Yeah.
So I'm anxious to hear a little. I need a history lesson here.
Sure. Well, Jack Claybourne was born in Mexico, Missouri. Oh. So he was born in a town called Mexico, Missouri. He was one of the pioneers. So what I didn't know until I read about Jack Claybourne was there were segregated wrestling cards. Did you know this?
No.
Yeah. So in the Midwest and in the South, certain towns ran segregated wrestling cards where only black wrestlers would wrestle black wrestlers, only white wrestlers would wrestle white wrestlers. Much like the famous stories in Memphis that you'd hear.
Now, are we talking about
completely segregated?
Well, like, in other words, like the Negro League.
Yes. So this would be the equivalent.
Interesting. I've never heard that.
Particularly in Kentucky. So that's where Jack Claybourne got most of his fame. In Kentucky, segregated, it referred to it as the Kentucky Negro Wrestling. Not necessarily the name of the promotion, but that was the way that it was framed at the time. So this is a whole history lesson to me that I've just never heard of or never realized that there was at some point different promotions and even the segregated wrestlers, because wrestling has really been pretty good about integrating men and women of all races and colors and creeds.
It depended on the states, and a lot of the states would there would be black wrestlers who for many years would have black opponents. And as time went on, just like baseball, just like everything, it was those laws were done away with. But Jack Claybourne, now with these Parkhurst cards coming out of Canada, I would think that he had a history in either Montreal or Toronto.
He did. So in Toronto, he was very as notable as you can get for someone that we just heard of today. He was notably teamed with Luther Lindsay. And I know you know that name.
Yes, I do.
That's a name that would appear in magazines. To me, this would be the equivalent maybe of Tony Atlas teaming with S.D. Jones. For maybe more modern fans, Tony Atlas was more of a Luther Lindsay, and Jack Claybourne appears to be more of an S.D. Jones. So from what I can tell, interestingly enough, was very big in Hawaii and Australia. So a lot of these names, like you said, would appear to get some sort of experience and then go down to Jim Barnett's WCW.
Do we have a reference to when he wrestled till?
We don't. It was kind of difficult to find information. I believe he committed suicide, unfortunately, in 1970. So his career definitely, unfortunately, ended by then. But it says he excels in drop kicks and the flying head scissors. He's noticed for his little jig, which he upsets his opponents with. So kind of charismatic, got under his opponent's skin maybe with a little dance. We'll have to look and see if there's any footage of that. It says he's held many trophies. So not titles, but trophies. And yeah, this is interesting. So it says he's met all of the top stars. It doesn't say he's defeated them. He's met them. So,
how are you?
How are you? Yes. So maybe that's these cards do appear in both English and French. Maybe that met is intended to be he faced them. We
need a guy like Pat Lepard This is an odd duck, but nevertheless, an interesting character, Jack Claybourne.
And there you have it. Do you believe it? We talked more about Jack Claybourne than we did Hans Schmidt and Tex McKenzie. Isn't that interesting?
Well, He's an interesting man.
We'd spent 4 minutes and 9 seconds on the great Jack Claybourne. We're going to do some more research and see if we can dig up anything, maybe talk about on Last Stop Penn Station about some of the segregated wrestling, because I think that's an area of wrestling that I just found out about. I hadn't even considered it. And like you talked about, particularly in Kentucky. So maybe it was just state by state. Maybe we can ask our friend Jim Cornette.
He might know something. He would know something about that for sure.
Yeah, we'll check in with Jim Cornette, and we'll see if he can tell us anything more about that. But for now, we're 4 cards in, Cary. Are you feeling any more confident about who we might see in this set?
Well, after Jack Claybourne, I'm hoping the next one, at least I know the name. But that's the fun of doing this.
Yeah, and I think you will. We have a fun one coming up next time. So for Uncle Gunny, Captain Lil Albano, Lamb Chop, who's been roaming around here, Cary, Bisson Creative, it's Ian Riccaboni here. Check us out at Last Stop Penn Station, and check us out next time, 55 and 5.